Welcome everyone to another episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. Now, this is always a fun one for us, but it's going to be an AOA Q&A. And if you haven't listened to us before, this is a podcast about fishing, as the name implies, and also about Jesse's and mine opinion about the most random, stupid things, but mainly about fishing. I'm your host today, Andrew, and as usual, we have Jesse, the man with the glasses and a brand new musky tackle box. So Jesse will be sending us some prompts and kind of reading out some prompts that he posted online. But first, we have a TNT.
So this week, I actually had a few people message me about this because I did post something on Instagram a few weeks ago about fishing one of the most popular swim baits out there on the market, and that is the Megabass Mag Draft. Now, if you've never seen a Megabass Mag Draft, it's a 6-inch, well, there's multiple sizes, but we're going to be talking about the 6-inch model. It's a 6-inch swim bait. It is a fish catching machine. A lot of times you'll see people fishing these in the States and they're going for bigger fish. It also comes in 8-inch and 10-inch. I have the 8-inch as well. I've caught fish on it. It is for trophy fish, and the 10-inch one is a giant. I've seen it in the tackle store and it is giant. I'm not saying that it's something that you couldn't catch a fish in Ontario on. You probably definitely could, especially muskie and pike. But for bass, the 6-inch is definitely the supreme size. It's just big enough to attract the big fish, but it's not too big that you'll even catch 12-inch bass on it as well. So I've had several people message me about tips on using this because it is such a cool lure to use. I think that's the main thing about it. We were talking to some guys at Sail the other day, and they were talking about fishing the Mag Draft, and I was like, it's a great lure. You miss a lot of fish on it, but when you do finally connect with a fish, it's absolutely amazing. So I thought I'd just give you my Mag Draft tips because it's one of my most successful soft plastic swim baits. So there's 3 different ways that I like to fish it. If you go to the store, you're probably going to find the regular 6-inch Mag Draft with the hook harness in it. Now, it comes in a 1-pack, and then there's an internal harness inside of the bait, and then there's a magnet that the hook snaps to on the bottom. That's why they call it a Mag Draft, apparently, because there's a magnet inside. Ooh, clever, Megabass.
It doesn't stand for Magnum because it's a large bait.
Who knows?
Missed opportunity.
But anyway, that is the most common one. It's the one with the rigged harness already in it, and there's a treble hook on the bottom that pretty much clips into the bottom of the body, so as you're fishing it, it stays up and not hanging down under the weeds. But when you hook a fish, it breaks free, and you can fight the fish without the whole bait, the fish being able to use that as leverage. Now, the problem that I've had with this is that magnet sucks really bad. The magnet, the hook pops out all the time. There's all kinds of mods that you can do to make it stick in there. But for me, the magnet's not the best. The other problem is I do fish in a lot of weeds and timber. So when I'm fishing for big fish in Ontario, I'm talking big largemouth and smallmouth bass, and I'm fishing a Mag Draft, I'm probably casting it near terrible things. I'm talking docks, sticks, the edge of lily pads, full down tree laydowns in the water, big rocks. I don't want a full-size treble hook hanging off the bottom of this bait. That's more of an open water situation for me. This is actually my least used Mag Draft just because of that, because the hook's on the bottom and it's exposed. So what I did this year, and I had pretty good success with it so far, is I have a Mag Draft with my own line through system, and the treble hook is on the top of the bait. That way I can reel it through timber on top of weeds, and you get snagged way less. I was actually surprised how well it came through lily pads and over sticks and stuff like that. So the cool thing, the tip about this is you get your 6-inch bait, but you have to buy what they call the Megabass Freestyle. It comes in a 2-pack. It doesn't have the internal rig. It's just the bare plastic. And it actually has apparently thicker, harder plastic at the front, so when you're rigging it, it doesn't tear up. So the cool thing about this tip is you have this 6-inch paddle tail bait, and what you're going to do is you're going to grab a small straw. So either a straw like from a WD-40 can. What I did is I got an old pen and I cut off about 3/4 of an inch of the tube of the inside of the pen. And what you do is you get like a screwdriver or something that is sharp, and you stick it up through the front of the bait and out behind the head. And then that makes a hole. And then what you do is you get a drop of super glue. You stick it on your little tube that you've cut. You stick it through there. And that basically allows you to have a line through. So your line can go through the head of the bait, and then you tie on a treble hook. And I have a BKK treble hook, which are ridiculously sharp. Me and Andrew have almost died touching these hooks so many times. I'd highly recommend them.
Said to be so sharp, you can cut yourself just by looking at it.
You look at it, again, you don't need a large hook. It just has to be big enough to hook the fish. Now, the cool thing is because it's a line through, the same thing. When you hook a fish on this bait, they usually headshot it or they grab it from behind and completely crumple it into their mouth. And that hook, it's so sharp, it almost hooks them every single time. I've had very few fish that grabbed it and got off. It pins them really good. Cool thing is when you do hook a fish, that treble hook actually breaks free and then the lure is free to swing up and down your line because it's still attached with the straw. So again, like I said, that is a really cool mod. But the one thing you have to do to make this lure complete is the belly slit that these baits come with. You have to stick a weight in there so that the bait actually sinks down a bit and actually keels so that it doesn't just flip over on its side. So what I did is I grabbed a 1/4 ounce drop shot cylinder weight, stuck it in there, got some super glue, glued it together, and there you go. You got a perfectly awesome swim bait that you can chuck almost anywhere except for the thickest of cover. And you're going to hook, I won't say every fish, but the majority of the fish you're going to hook. That is a cool bait. So the last one is one that you can fish through heavy cover, but you probably won't hook every fish that you're going to catch, but you only use this from necessity. So here's the same bait. It's the Megabass Freestyle 6-inch. And I have on that an 8/0 beast hook, which is a Texas rigged hook with the screw keeper on the front. So that bait, when you rig it Texas rigged, you can chuck that through literally anything. I was chucking it through reeds, through lily pads, through wood. It comes through anything. It doesn't matter. The problem with that is you have this huge gaff of a hook. It's an 8/0 hook. It's huge. But when the fish bites down on it, that big hook pops up. My tips for this would be you need a lot different gear to fish this big weedless one than you do the small one with the treble hook. The small one with the treble hook, you can actually get away using a medium heavy rod with that. No problem. Even like 16-pound fluorocarbon or 30-pound braid, easy, no problem. You could probably catch fish on a spin, like a medium power spinning rod with this. If you were going to do it, you could probably do it. But when you're using this big 8/0 beast hook, it literally looks like a mini shark hook. It's huge. You have to use proper gear. If you're using line, you have to go up to 20-pound at least for fluorocarbon. I was using 50-pound braid because I was fishing in really heavy cover and I didn't think the fish would really care. But you need to use a stiffer rod. I was using a heavy power rod. When that fish grabs that bait, especially if it's a bigger fish, you have to move so much bait through that fish's mouth and then get that big, thick 8/0 hook into the top of their mouth. It takes a lot of power and a really strong hook set. So if you are using the Megabass Mag Draft, I highly recommend it. Don't be shy. If you've never fished big baits before, this may look huge to you. You may be like, 6-inch bait, that's huge. It looks like some of the fish that I actually catch. Like, don't worry though. As Andrew can attest, I've caught some absolute dinks on these things, like 12, 13-inch bass, no problem. But the cool thing about these baits is you are going to attract, generally speaking, the biggest or the bigger fish in the lake. And if you're really, really wanting to attract the bigger fish, jump up to the 8-inch and you'll attract even bigger fish. But remember, the bigger the bait you use, the less fish you'll catch. But when you do catch a fish, it will be a giant. So give those a try. Whichever one you need to use to get the job done. Again, weedless one in the weeds, top hook everywhere else, and the bottom hook one, meh. So that's my tip. But yeah, I highly recommend you try it. It is a very fun way to get a bite, and it's an enjoyable way to go fishing. It's a great way to gain confidence in a new technique. So definitely give that a try this summer.
I like how you said I can attest to it. You have caught dinks in that. And I think that's the reason why Jesse hasn't gotten into BFS, is because he doesn't need to catch the small fish.
It's true. Just chuck a huge swim bait and you'll catch them anyway. Plus, you feel real manly when you're chucking a big 6-inch bait on 50-pound line and you crack the hook so hard that you teach them to fly. That's manly.
Yes, send all these little bass into orbit.
Yeah.
I think I've seen Jesse send a bass flying over the boat, I'd say at least half a dozen times. That's not an exaggeration. Like, he set the hook and like 30 feet away, these things will come sailing over the boat.
I'm always setting the hook like it's a 5-pounder because one day it will be.
Yeah, you're just going to pull lightly and then you're going to see that 8-pounder swim away.
Yeah. Dang it.
So that's a good technique. That is something that I do want to fish more, even myself, of some bigger rubber. I mean, not just for muskie, but for bass as well. I know this year we're going to be trying some bigger baits. I know myself trying some bigger baits. I'm going for that PB. I'm not counting out the finesse stuff either, but I'm also going to throw some big baits. So we're going to get into our main topic, and our main topic is pretty much every topic that people are thinking of when they think of average Ontario anglers. So our wonderful Patreon listeners, we're going to answer some of their questions first that they posted for us. And then after, we're going to use the remaining time and answer a bunch of other questions from our listeners and followers on Instagram. We try and always recommend people to ask us anything fishing related, because we're going to get some weird ones in there. We got some weird ones anyways, and we'll see how many of them make it to air, but Jesse's going to start feeding us some prompts here. So we're going to start off some Patreon questions.
Yeah, so we actually did get probably over 50 questions. So we're going to try, I know we say this every time, we're going to try to go through the majority of them and answer them in 2 minutes or less. Will we succeed? Absolutely not. But here's a good question. So these are from our Patreon members. Again, we'd like to thank them for helping support the show, because every week there are costs to run this show. So our first question is from Carlos from Patreon. He basically said, if you can have 3 rigs set up, 2 spinning and 1 bait caster, what would your setup be for multi-species in summer months in Ontario? So you get 3 combos, 2 spinning, 1 bait casting.
So bait casting, got to go to the regular 7'1" to 7'3", medium heavy bait caster. I can fish it in cover. I can fish, larger baits, like small swim baits. You can still fish with that. So that's kind of my go-to for that one.
What line?
Something like between 30 and 50 pound braid. I'll use on that. And I usually just mainline braid on my bait casting rod anyways. I'm rarely fishing it. I'm fishing it around cover. I'm rarely fishing my bait caster in like crystal clear water. So I don't have to worry about a leader on it. And then I really like having I would say a medium light spinning combo. It'd be 7 foot long, just so you can fish some of those like lighter techniques like the Ned rig or pitching the Sanko or whatnot. And then I'd probably go a medium, maybe a little bit shorter, like 6'8", something like that, with for fishing, smaller top waters or jerk baits or something like that. That's probably the ones that I'd go with. And again, spinning reels, I usually put on 15-pound braid and tie on like a 10-pound leader.
Yeah, that's very similar to what I would say. So yeah, I'm going to go with that similar too. I think I would have, again, 7 foot, 7'3", medium heavy, 30-pound braid. For my bait caster, for spinning, I'd probably go with a 7 foot, medium heavy spinning rod, 15-pound braid, 10-pound leader for just like general purpose. And then I'd go with like a 7 foot to 7'3" medium light spinning rod with, 10-pound braid with a 6 to 8 pound leader for finesse stuff. That would cover everything. Finesse all the way up to fairly heavy cover. Hopefully those 3 setups, you can pick them up for only $8 million. Just kidding. I guess so many people would be like, you make me spend too much money when I listen to the podcast. Like, I'm sorry, guys.
Every time I run into a guy in a fishing store and he's like, hey, it's the Average Ontario Anglers. It's like, yes, we are. And they always get mad at us for, their empty wallets.
Yeah, I've had a few wives of the guys that listen be like, I hate you, but my husband loves you. Oh, okay. Here's a good question from Slap That Bass on Patreon. He says, both of you describe what fish the other would be and why.
That's a good one.
For me, I think Andrew is like a rock bass because
never know when to quit.
Yeah, he never knows when to quit. Sometimes he'll like be at one fishing spot forever. And I'm just like sitting there waiting to go. I'm like, can we try another spot? And he's like, no, I saw a fish bubble 3 hours ago here. And then he'll just be there. Another reason why is because oftentimes when I'm walking along, the shoreline at night and I shine my flashlight in the water, there's just like a rock bass staring at me. And oftentimes when I'm fishing, I look over at Andrew and he's just staring at me. So that is why he is like a rock bass.
I would have to say Jesse is a steelhead. And I don't mean just any steelhead. I mean a big old mean steelhead that has seen everything. It's also a cold front with crystal clear water, no rain in the creek for days, super spooked, and stubborn as all get out. But he's also a steelhead because he's always in the move, and that guy doesn't like to sit at a spot for hours. He's if he's not, trying to eat, he's trying to spawn, I guess. I don't know. He's just always in the move, changing where he's going to be in the situation. But yeah, I'd call Jesse a steelhead, especially one, like I said, on a cold front, real finicky day.
Okay.
Where all they want to touch is like a 3mm bead on 2-pound fluoro.
Yeah, I was going to say, he just picked that because he knows that I'm hard-headed. It's okay. All right, so this is a question from Tim from Patreon. He says, this is the scenario. He gives us a full scenario. This is quite a read, so listen up. Scenario, the two of you are standing on the shore on the point of Georgian Bay Island. The water has some weed, some rock. drops off nicely into some deeper water. You have 10 casts to catch a fish that is at least 1 pound in size. It doesn't matter what kind of fish. Only one of you can cast. If you catch this fish, you get $1 million. Who is casting and what lure are you using? No live bait allowed.
Well, if you're standing on shore casting out, it's not really like if you're fishing, hey, you have to skip under a dock, I'd say it's Jesse. Jesse should take that cast. So accuracy isn't as high. I would say it would be me with something like a Senko or a Ned rig, just because 1 pound is not like that big of a fish. So I feel like the more finesse approach might get that strike.
I agree. Andrew is the dink master, so I would just be like, all right, tie on one of those fuzzy dice that you like using and drop shot. Here's another question. This is actually a really good question from Donnie on Patreon. He says, if you could snap your fingers and acquire the skill set and knowledge of any angler in the world, who would it be and why?
I would say Kevin Van Dam. Now, not because he's the GOAT, he's great, but because he has a skill, not only that just crazy beyond mine, but he specializes in like power fishing. And that's what I am not the greatest at. So for me to instantly just become, even better than Jesse at that, I think would be a great rub it in his face kind of thing. But no, it'd make more sense to do that than to do something that I've been growing my own skill in for a while, or that I'm already not good at, but better than the other thing.
Yeah. I'd say if you're thinking bass fishing, really any elite bass angler that's, been in the game for more than 20 years, that has a good reputation, that would be a good call, because those guys fish all over the place. They're fishing 300 days plus in the water. They have so much knowledge and skill. Like, you couldn't really go wrong picking any of those like classic guys, like, Van Dam, Denny Brower and Rick Clunn, like any of those guys, super knowledgeable.
That or Roland Martin.
Yeah. He's been around.
I like classics too. Yeah. So
I'd say though, if I was living in Ontario though, and I had to have these skills, having the skills of Roland Martin, some guy that lives in Florida, not really interested. I would probably say Doug Wagner, that guy that fishes muskie up on Lake of the Woods. That guy is a hammer. And muskie, that information takes so long to acquire. To get that instantly would just be like, it would put you like 50 years ahead. So instead of me being 80 and finally learning how to catch a muskie, I could be 33 and finally learn how to catch a muskie. Hooray. This is Jamie from Patreon. He says, what are some mistakes you feel like you've made along the way that helped you grow as an angler? Or things that you feel like you used to suck at, but now are kind of proficient at? That's a good question.
Fishing in general.
Yeah. I'd say like there's so many mistakes that I've made over the years. And I'm sure every single person, no one's going to say they've never made mistakes in fishing. I'd say one of the biggest mistakes that I learned pretty quick especially once we got underwater cameras, is that I was fishing like finesse baits way too fast. Like, slow down. You can be really slow. You want that bait just to kind of twitch. We would just be like drop shotting and stuff like that. But as soon as we went ice fishing, we had a camera down and we were just like moving our rod, you'd see your bait just swing up and down like 2-3 feet. You're like, wow, I'm super overworking my bait. This is crazy. And as soon as we learned that and we started actually being super finessey, we did start catching a lot more fish. I wish that I had learned that a lot sooner, but technology is good sometimes to teach you things. So that's one thing I would say.
For me, something that I know that I've gotten a lot better at is casting a structure. I feel like that's almost like a cop-out, because that's just something that you have to learn and train yourself with, like motor skills and muscle memory and stuff to cast more accurately and whatnot. The other thing I would mention is the gear that I'm buying. A lot of the times I would just buy things because and I still do, because I want to catch on them, or especially with my rods and reels, I'll just buy them like, oh, this will do me for 17 purposes. And I get like when you're starting out and you only have a couple combos, you kind of need that. You need something that will be an all-around use for you. But being able to buy equipment, like especially when we started carp fishing, having an actual carp rod and a carp reel, like this is just so much nicer. Going bass fishing and instead of having to paddle in for all the bass and actually having a heavy enough bait caster and learning how to fish a bait caster to be able to fish frogs properly over cover, my enjoyment just went even higher. So having the right equipment, and kind of sometimes you had to bite the bullet to do it, and maybe you limit to yourself to maybe less techniques to do over the year, but you learn how to do those really well, and then you have fun doing them.
Here's a good question from Aiden from Patreon. He says, You can only eat one type of fish for the rest of your life. What species are you choosing and how are you preparing it? I'll let Andrew handle this because he's a fish eater.
I'd say pike. Pike is, one, delicious. Two, you get a lot of meat off of one fish. Like once someone had to fillet it, it might take you longer to fillet that one fish than to fillet like one walleye or one bass or one perch, whatever you want to say. Except I'm going to get, the same amount of meat as 3 walleye off of that one pike. So I would say pike, and then because I've learned to fillet them boneless, and I'm still learning more, I would go beer batter. Fresh beer battered pike, that's tasty. What about you, Jesse? Catfish sandwiches?
Andrew actually we caught some channel catfish one time. Andrew filleted up and made Cajun catfish sandwiches. It was super good. I think all fish taste good with batter on them.
Yeah.
So let's just say that. All right. So we're going to switch to Instagram. I made the mistake of putting this question out like early in the morning. So there's actually like 50 questions, but we're not going to get to all these. This is a question from Long Branch 1943. He said, I got my first muskie setup. Top 3 lures with color recommendations to get. I would say if you're just getting started out muskie fishing and you're buying legitimate muskie lures, like there's lots of people will be like, oh, buy a Mepps Muskie Killer or some like basically big bass lures. We're talking actual muskie lures. I would say number 1 is pick between these two, a bucktail, like a 888 bucktail, or a big spinnerbait, like a musky size spinnerbait, and pick that depending on where you're fishing. I fish near a lot of weeds. I love spinnerbaits. The other day I was out fishing. I caught my first muskie of the season on a big black spinnerbait with a big silver blade because we were fishing around weeds. If you cast a 888 bucktail around weeds, you will be picking weeds off your hook all day. So pick one of those. That would be blades, either 888 or a big black spinnerbait or whatever color. I like black. Black is a classic musky color. It's hard to go wrong with black and orange, purple. Anything dark like that is a great lure. Second bait, I'd say, would be a topwater, like a plopper, like a big whopper plopper. And that is a fun way to catch a muskie is on the topwater. And you just cast and retrieve it. Super easy. I'd fish that in, again, black or white, but generally black. It's just like, its silhouette's good against, when they're looking up at it. And it works great at nighttime too.
I was going to say putting rubber in there just so you have your topwater, you have your kind of mid-range of the spinner, and then maybe a tube, because there's lots of ways to fish tube. They are versatile. You're going to have to get used to like the technique of it. It's not the easiest thing. You just cast out and you'll know how to do it, but it is an effective bait that don't break the bank either.
I would get either a tube or just like a bulldog, like a regular sized bulldog. And again, not that hard of a bait to use. You do need slightly specialty gear to use some bigger bait like that. Slightly heavier rod. It's hard to go wrong with that. And you don't need a lot of musky lures. Like we do all have a lot of musky lures, but when you think of it at the end of the day, you probably only throw, if you have 50 lures, you probably only throw like 4 every day. And you just might switch the colors, right? So keep it simple, have blades, rubber, a topwater, and maybe a crankbait, and you're good. That's all you need. And again, for colors, I think like my favorite color, black and orange, purple, some perch colors. Like, what do you say, Andrew?
I do like things with contrast, but yeah, mainly black. Maybe throw something light in there just for those kind of overcast days, like white or yellow, kind of like walleye colors, something like that. But mostly black.
Yeah. When in doubt, get black. It works all the time. Works in the day, works at night. Doesn't matter. So it's not really a question. This guy just said, tell people to load all their gear into their boat before they're on the ramp. I agree with you. That is a huge annoyance. And I'll tell you, you'll never see AOA doing that. We always have our boat ready to go and just slide it in and off, go fishing. Have your gear ready. Don't be that idiot that's in front of the launch getting your boat ready especially when there's cars waiting. And we don't even do it even if there's no other people waiting, because someone could show up.
Yeah, because some guy's going to take his boat out, or some guys want to put his boat in, and he's all ready to go because he lives 2 minutes down the road and his gears literally just lives in his boat.
So the etiquette has kind of gone downhill for a lot of people, but don't do that. Here's a question. This guy says, what lake should I go to catch muskie on a rental boat? Not a lot of information as to where you live, but if you're in Ontario, there's so many places to go catch muskie. We fish the Kawarthas. All the Kawartha lakes have muskie in them. You could rent a rental boat on any of the popular Kawartha lakes. There's all kinds of like little resorts and fishermen's resorts. I would definitely check out the Kawarthas for that. The Ottawa River is really popular. And then French River is popular as well. Lake St. Clair, easy Google search to search like best places to fish for muskie in Ontario. And I guarantee you'll get so many hits. It's crazy. Ontario is full of muskie. Here's a good question. This is from Simon. He says, what are you going to look for when trying to locate fish on a lake?
Greenweeds, current. That's what I've learned. Every guide out there is looking for is like find where there's going to be current and greenweeds and access to deep water. That's the three things. If you find that, there are going to be fish on that spot. Somewhere in that range, there's going to be fish.
I'd also say too, is look for, once you're at those spots, is look for something different. Look for the spot on the spot. So like say you're, on a nice weed line near an island, and then there's a rock that juts out. The fish are probably going to be on that rock. Fish relate to things that are different. So like say it's sand bottom, then it turns to rock. That transition is going to attract fish for whatever reason. Fish are weird. So look for things that are different. Like Andrew said, so many times we've been fishing and we'll be like, the guys will be like, oh, look for the green weeds. If you're fishing around weeds that look all slimy and brown, probably not the best option. Find nice, healthy weeds, because nice, healthy weeds attract food, which attracts bait fish, which attracts game fish, which attract muskie, which eat the game fish. So all the fish are attracted to the green weeds. So that's a pretty good tip. But you know what? It's hard. Sometimes you look at a lake and you're just like, where the heck do I start? So one thing that I definitely recommend is look at the Navionics, the topographic maps of the lake. There's so many courses on YouTube, like free courses, like how to read a lake. They're long, they're boring. Sit through one of them, crack open a beer and sit through one of those. You'll learn a lot and you'll learn how to plan better to catch fish. That's one thing me and Andrew are trying to do better at, is planning out our day, not just getting to the lake and being like, oh, what looks good? Before we go out, we'll be looking and the day before. And then when we get to the launch, after we launch the boat, we're like, okay, what spot did you want to fish? Okay, this looks good. This looks good. Oh, this, there's a deep spot by this island I want to fish, and there's some current coming down. So we really plan, like, we're going to fish these spots. They're high percentage spots. And then once you get to those spots, again, like I said, look for things that are different on that spot. So definitely do that. You'll save a lot of time and you will catch more fish. Here's a question from Grease Monkeys. He says, best braid to fluoro knot. This is going to start some controversy.
The best is the FG knot. And I think most people who know it would probably agree with that. I think Jesse would agree with that. The most popular, the one that I pretty much only ever use, is the Crazy Alberto knot, because it's easy to tie and it still holds up really well.
Yeah. I think the word best is kind of subjective there. In knot tying tests, is the FG knot the strongest? It is. I'm pretty sure it's one of the top ones. And it is the thinnest connection knot. So that could be, a good reason for calling it the best. But I feel like the Crazy Alberto knot that me and Andrew use all the time, it is thicker because the line's doubled over. So if you're using like a spinning rod and like you're connecting like 10-pound braid to like 6-pound line, that connection is going to be so thin anyway. But if you're attaching like 18 or 20 pound fluorocarbon to 50-pound leader for like flipping, and you do an Alberto knot and you flip that 20 pound fluorocarbon over, so now it's 40 pound thick at that connection point, that's thick and it'll make it stuck in the guide. So yeah, an FG knot is better in that way. Is it better because it takes a lot more effort and time and skill to tie? No.
It's also one of the ones you might mess up on it halfway through.
Yeah. Again, I learned to tie the FG knot. Once you learn how to do it, it's not difficult. You can do it correctly all the time. So it's not that bad. I think a lot of people look at it and they're like, wow, that's complicated. I don't want to learn that. But then there's also FG knot snobs, people that are like, if you're not tying the FG knot, you're going to lose fish. It's like, well, how come we never lost fish before we learned the FG knot? Like the Albright knot is strong. They're like, well, the FG knot's 98% strong and the Alberto knot's only 93. If you're setting the hook and snapping your knot on 93% strength, you're doing something wrong. Your gear or your hook set is wrong. The Alberto knot is fine. If you're reeling your leader onto your reel and casting it through the guides, the FG knot is the knot because it's so thin. But if I'm flipping and I feel like the fish are pressured and I want to attach like a 3 or 4 foot piece of like 20 pound fluorocarbon or whatever, I'm going to use a Crazy Alberto knot. I've never had one snap off if you're doing it properly. Remember, if you are tying a connection knot and you're using like a bait caster, you have to slightly loosen your drag. So when you set the hook, there has to be a little bit of give or else you will snap your knot, because all that energy comes through the braid when you just instantly snap it and it all goes right to that knot and you'll snap it off every time. Loosen the drag a little bit and you won't have that problem. Crazy Alberto knot, learn it. It's a super easy knot. You can tie it in like literally 10 seconds. Cole says, our opinion on targeting salmon in the creeks in warm weather. Chinooks will go up the creek sometimes I've seen them in the creeks as early after a good rain in late July. They'll shoot up the creek sometimes. But by mid-August, the creek will be loaded with Chinook and the water temps will be super high. And you'll be fishing some days when it's August. It's 35 degrees outside. It's super hot. And people are catching Chinook in warm water. The water's way too warm. Fish don't have enough, oxygen already in the creeks because the warmer the water, the less oxygen it has. And they catch these fish. And then when they release them, they may swim off, but they end up dying. You see dead fish all the time in August. And sometimes they just die because they shoot up the creek fast after a big rain, not realizing that the water is so warm. And the water is soupy warm because it's so hot outside. And those fish just naturally die because of low oxygen. It's not like every dead fish you see in August is someone caught it. But when they do catch them and they fight them forever on a noodle rod or a light, float setup, a lot of those fish die. So my opinion would be with all species, especially trout, you shouldn't, but there's no rule against it. So use your best judgment, I would say. Here's a good question from Evan. He says, how long do you give a lure before switching it up if it's not getting bites? I guess it depends on the day. Sometimes I'll use the same one or two, I'll have 3 or 4 rods and I won't even retie because I know these baits are going to work. I have my system down. But other times, especially when I'm fishing and it's slow, I'll oftentimes shuffle through baits pretty fast. I know that's probably not the best idea, but I think a lot of people just tend to do that. You're fishing a bait and you're okay, I'm not getting bit, so this bait isn't working. But really, it could be a lot of other factors. It could be the fish aren't here. Say you're fishing shallow weeds, but it was hot, so the fish slid down deeper and you're fishing shallow weeds still. This lure's not working. It's it would work if there was fish there, but they're not here. So
sometimes I'll tie stuff on and do 1-2 casts. I'm nah, this is it. And it's just a gut feeling of bringing that bait in. And it's not for how the weather's kind of slow and it seems maybe it's too much rattle. I thought it wasn't, the action of this, maybe it's not what I was thinking when I first tied it on, and I'll swap it out right away. There are times I'll do that, but yeah, if my tried and trues aren't working, then I'll just start shuffling through baits because for me, it's not even let's find out what's working. I'm let's just try all these baits again.
Yeah. I'd say one thing that it's hard to do, but instead of swapping through baits like crazy, swap places that you're fishing. If you're not catching fish, in a certain area that you normally catch fish on and the baits you normally catch fish on, I'd switch baits 1 or 2 times, try different things that are different. So if I was fishing a topwater frog, oftentimes this happens, I'll be fishing my area, lily pads, topwater frog, and the fish, they're just not going. They're not willing to participate in the topwater frog action. They're not cooperating at all. And the only change you need to do is flip the lily pads, chuck a jig, chuck Texas rig plastic into those. And that presentation is what they want. Other times you can try multiple things in those same areas and there won't be any fish there, or they're just completely shut off. So in that case, I'll switch techniques and fish a different area. You may be oh, this lily pad's not working. I'm going to fish the first weed line out in 7 to 10 feet of water, and all the fish might be there. So change lures if you have to. Don't use the same lure all day. That may be dumb, especially if they're not hitting it. But switch spots too. This is not a question, but this is from Southern Ontario Angling. He says, you can't convince me that boaters don't go out of their way to swamp kayaks and canoes. I agree with you as someone that fished out of kayaks and now a canoe for many years. I feel that people have literally just lost their minds. I'll give you an example. I was fishing the Trent River a few years ago with my buddy in my sports pal. I'm going down the Trent River in a no wake zone. It's 10 kilometers an hour zone. This guy flies by us and leaves this 5-foot wave. And we're in the sports pal, which if you didn't know, it's a small 14-foot canoe and it's barely 6 inches off the water. And this guy flies by us and leaves a 6-foot wake. And he was literally within, I'd say 20 feet of us. He whipped right by us and I turned the boat just in time to hit the waves head on and we filled half with water. And he didn't even care. He looked back and just didn't care. So it does happen. I feel when we're in Andrew's boat and we're upping around, not that it's a big boat, we do, because we know we've been in the other person's shoes. We give canoeists and kayakers, a wide area when we're driving past them. But if we do have to drive past them, we do slow down and try not to wake them. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. So that is a good tip to be extra safe. Make sure you're wearing your life jacket. Make sure valuables are tied down. have all your stuff like, kind of bundled together in case you do flip over, because it does happen. I've seen it happen. So what's happened to me so many times. You wouldn't want to flip over and lose everything, like your cell phone and all your tackles just loose and it sinks down. Make sure everything is like together. Otherwise you will lose stuff, unfortunately. But yeah, a lot of boaters, they're big wieners. What can I say?
I have to say like 40% of the boaters I encounter have poor etiquette, or close to, at least on the lakes we're fishing that we're on. And I remember it used to be like, it was very rare when you had some guy who was not slowing down for a canoeist or a kayaker.
Yeah.
It was very rare.
Yeah. So. Times have changed. Here's a good question from Jeff. What do you do with your old rods that you don't use anymore? Old equipment that you don't use?
They stay in my house and they collect dust because one day I might have a use for that.
Yeah. I collect rods. I don't keep a lot of the rods I bought when I was younger. I started buying high-end rods when I was 14, 15 years old. I think I was 13, 14. I bought my first, I would say, high-end rod. I saved up at a paper route. I saved up for months and I bought a St. Croix Avid salmon steelhead rod. At the time, it was like $270 or something like that. And my parents thought I lost my mind. Like, oh, you spent $300 on it was like a trout rod, like a 9.6 medium light. I still have it, like, more than 15 years later. So I like buying higher end stuff, like not super high end stuff, but I like buying decent stuff. So my collection, I upgrade rods. So like rods, like the other week I was at sale and I bought a new flipping stick. I already have a flipping stick. I bought a nicer one because I like nice gear. You don't need it. You definitely don't need it. Again, we fished for years using very budget gear. But now that I'm older, I'm an adult, I have no problem with treating myself once in a while. But with all of our old rods, sometimes they have sentimental value. I have the first rod that I ever bought. I bought at Barclays back in the day. I'll never use that thing. It's a 5.5 foot medium light Gatorback Zebco spinning rod. It's a piece of trash, but it has sentimental value to me because I fished it for so long. I have rods remember that 6.6 medium convergence? I used to use that for everything. It was a spinning rod. I had a 2500 Sahara on it. That was the one combo I had for so many years, and I used it to catch everything. And the rod, the cork is completely pitted and half gnarled up. Looks like a dog chewed on it. The reel wobbles like crazy. I don't use them, but I keep them because I like them. So I guess that's what happens. We accumulate. If you saw me and Andrew's rods collections, you'd probably think we're insane. We have probably a combined 75 rods between us.
Yeah, we get more rods than some people have lures. Yeah, I still have the first rod, like rod and reel that wasn't like off the shelf combo from like Shimano or whatever. And it was the Bass Pro Shops tourney special. And it was a 6.6 medium, the red one with the cork handle. The rod tip broke off during a canoe battle. And so I had to replace the tip of that. And
that wasn't my fault.
that was my brother's fault and yours, yeah. And my old Abu Garcia spinning reel with like the wooden handle, and it's wobbly as heck. Like, but I still have them because it's my first. That was the first time I actually put a bit of money. I think that combo cost me in total like $140, the two together. But as a kid, I made $50 a month, so it was like a lot for me to save up for and get. And I was like, this is when I started to really like fishing and put effort into it.
Yeah.
So I still have that combo.
Here's a good question. He said, what are the pros and cons of basket nets versus cradle nets? So he's probably talking about musky fishing. So if you're not aware, a basket net is a regular net that you see, the handle, and has a big hoop with a big net in it, like a basket. And a cradle net, I feel like they were really popular a few years ago and they just kind of dropped off. I don't see any pros using, like professional musky guys using cradle nets. Cradle net is like it's two sticks with a cradle of mesh and you kind of like cradle the fish into it. Like we were actually just talking about this the other day when we were at Gagnon's because they had a cradle, and I was like, I like the idea of it, but the execution of getting a fish into the cradle seems like a nightmare.
It's like, it looks like a stretcher, like how guys like but it's a just big soft net in the middle, so it's not rigid, but it's like a stretcher that you see like on sporting events, and they roll the guy onto it and lift him onto the field, like a Looney Tunes cartoon. But yeah, it's kind of real awkward. Like again, I've never used one either, but I imagine it's super awkward to get a muskie perfectly lined up sideways. Yeah, it just seems weird.
How many times, like again, I was muskie fishing a few days ago. I got a nice one. And every time you hook a good muskie, like a muskie that actually is, decent size, like anything over like 3 feet long, That thing's going nuts. It's digging, it's jumping. The last thing I want to think about is trying to, like Andrew said, trying to get this thing perfectly into a little slot of a net. Like, we want to just bag that thing as soon as possible. You hook that fish, and I know it sounds terrible, but like muskie fishing, it's not really about the fight. Like, the fight is over very quick. When you hook that fish, it's in the bag in 10 seconds, hopefully, because you don't want to lose that fish. It took you so many casts and so much time and hours and effort to get it to bite. I don't want to be like fumbling around with some weird cradle. And I think the reason why cradles kind of faded off is because nets have come a long way. And now, like, our net, we have a massive net. I kind of regret getting it because it's so big, but it is nice to have. It's a Ranger. It's literally like 3.5 feet wide, maybe 4 feet wide. And the bag is 4 feet wide and 4 feet deep. So when you have a muskie in that, even a good fish, that fish is completely straight out in the net. It might be a little bit curved if it was a big fish, but it's in the water. The net's hanging off the side of the boat, and that fish is fully in the water, just like a cradle. And the fish is not like curved up. It's not like, and you see a guy who has a very small like bass or walleye net stuffed like a 40-inch muskie in it, and it's just like the fish is like a U. It's just like head out of the water, tail out of the water. Yeah, that's bad. But these new big muskie nets that are popular now, they basically do the job of a cradle, and it protects the fish a lot. So they're still in the water, they're safe. You can, after you hook a muskie, you're all like, jittery, and you can just let the fish sit in the net, recuperate a bit. You recuperate a bit because you're all shaky. Then you can go down as the fish is still in the water and use your tools to safely and effectively get, the lure out of its mouth. Then take a quick picture. You can even put it back in the net, let it recuperate a bit, and then you release it, and then that's it. So I don't see the point myself of using a cradle.
Imagine how many muskie we would have lost if we only had a cradle net to use. Like, how many times has the hook popped out of that muskie's mouth right after we get it in that net? And they're like, oh, all of a sudden I feel a net, and they start to thrash, and there goes that hook. That Medusa is now in the side of that net, no longer in his mouth.
Yeah. Or, what's happened usually when you have a fish and it has one hook in its mouth and one hook hanging out, and you get it in the net, and that hook hits the side of the net, and the fish is like attached to a certain part of the net and shaking around, and you have to you're like, oh no, it's not fully in the bag. Imagine if that happened on a cradle, but it just happened, the head hit the middle of the cradle, and you're like, well, now I can't literally get it in the cradle at all. It just seems like a nightmare. I don't know. I'm sure the person that invented the muskie cradle was thinking, about safety. Yeah.
It's a really cool idea. You can measure it in the water and everything, right? Because the new ones even have like a strip with all the inches. So you butt the muskie right up to the front, and it's not exact, but you get like a good idea of how long it is. If you can manage it, that muskie will 100% stay in the water fully, and you can even measure the thing.
Yeah,
but it's just awkward to use.
Here's a good question from Mark. He says, would you rather catch, this is an easy answer, by the way. Would you rather catch 1,000 1-pound bass or 1 10-pound bass?
1 10-pound bass. I've already caught 1,000 1-pound bass.
Yeah, 1 10-pound bass. That would, especially in Ontario. Dude, if you told me I'd only catch one bass for the rest of my life and it was a 10-pound bass, and then after I caught that bass, I would never be able to catch another bass again, I would literally take that deal and then just devote my life to muskie or like walleye fishing. Yeah. Like I just caught literally almost the Ontario record. No one will ever hit that number in Ontario probably, or it probably will never happen. I'd be good. I'd retire at that point from bass fishing. Here's a question from Brandon. He says, would you guys be interested in speaking with a custom rod builder on the podcast? It would be my pleasure. What do you say, Andrew? Should we have a custom rod builder? It's kind of a niche thing. I don't know if we do a whole episode.
It's a niche thing. I would like to talk to him about like how rods are manufactured, though. The guy who does the whole process start to finish might know a bit more of hands-on experience than someone who works in a factory on like one section of just like putting cork on the handle or something. It'd be cool.
Yeah, it would be interesting. Let us know what you think. If you're listening to this podcast, would you like to hear from a custom rod builder? I was going to say, I'd love to hear him building a custom rod for me. That'd be fun. We'll let you know, Brandon. Here is a question from someone named Anderson. He said, have you guys gone fly fishing? What are your views on it? We have. We haven't in many years. I actually used to fly fish a lot back in the day, and then Andrew got into it a bit. I think it's got to have been at least 3 or 4 years since I actually picked up a fly rod. I actually used to work at Sail in the fly fishing department, and I used to literally fly fish all the time. I have probably like 6 or 7 fly combos, mostly steelhead and salmon stuff. But we did a lot of trout stuff, bass. Haven't done it in years. And honestly, it's one of those things. It's very satisfying but it's a hard way to catch a fish for a lot of things. I know a lot of fly guys are like, no, it's not hard, but it is harder than using lures generally because you're casting. If it's windy and there's trees, it's just, I found, especially with steelhead fishing where I fished, center pin fishing was more effective. So I just kind of stopped fly fishing for them because it was too much effort to catch fish. And I could do the same thing easier and more effectively, I found, with the center pin. But I will say though, fly fishing for smallmouth bass or like small stream trout or anything like that, it is super fun. And if that's what your hobby is fly fishing, it's hard to be a conventional fisherman and fly fish. I find I kind of like want to do one thing well, and I can't like divide my attention. So I kind of like dropped off of the fly fishing part of it. But I did, when I was doing it, I did really enjoy it. I know me and Andrew would go fly fishing all the time. We did really enjoy it, and we never snagged each other. Our fly casts were fairly accurate.
Yeah. I usually do it maybe once a year. And I used to go, like, I love doing fly fishing, and I'd bring two rods, bring a little spinning rod and a fly rod. And on the way up, we'd fish these holes doing, spinning, the spinning combos. On the way back, we'd be doing the fly rods or vice versa, and kind of fish the hole twice. So I love doing that. And then I've done that a little bit later on with the 3-weight fly rod, just like for fun. And like catching creek chub and stuff like that is a blast with that thing. Normally, like once a year, I like to do, like if I'm at my cottage, I'll spend one morning just doing fly fishing. And I'll do the same thing. I'll just drift down the shoreline and I'll be casting at like docks and like by trees. I have a moderate fast fly rod, so it's actually pretty accurate.
If we're on a long trip, to bring a fly rod combo and be like, okay, if there's a nice calm morning or a nice calm evening, I'll take the fly rod out. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times, the last few camping trips, I've packed a fly rod and reel and a bunch of flies specifically for bass. And then whenever I'm there, it's windy and I'm like, I don't want to fly fish. It's just going to be difficult. And whatever reason, it's just like, it doesn't, pan out. But I will continue to try. If fly fishing is like musky fishing, it's a difficult way to catch a fish, but very satisfying. And I understand why people become obsessed with it and make it their whole fishing personality. Mm-hmm. Here's a good question from Mitch. He says, what's your favorite breakfast before a morning of fishing? I'll tell you how most morning fishing trips start for me and Andrew. So this is a tradition. Andrew lives about 20 minutes away from me. So when I'm driving to pick him up for fishing, or if he's coming my way to pick me up, I always say, hey, I'm going to get up at 4 a.m. and I'm going to text you to see if you're awake. Because it's always the worst when you get ready for a fishing trip and you just have in the back of your mind, my buddy's probably forgot to set his alarm or he fell asleep and you're just going to be waiting for no one, right? So we always have that thing, like text me and make sure that you're awake just so that you know that they're there. So I always text him, are you alive? And then he says, I hate you every single time because it's 3:45, 4 a.m. in the morning. Yeah.
You feel like garbage. Like you don't want to go at that point.
Yeah. After working all week and then, it's Saturday morning and you're waking up at 4 a.m. It's like, but usually we don't eat big breakfasts because usually when we're fishing, because we live in the city, fishing anywhere that we want to fish, it's at least a 2-hour drive. So we're up at 4 a.m. We usually hit traditionally McDonald's or Tim Hortons in the morning. We get a coffee and that's it. And then we'll fish. And then usually we bring snacks in the boat. So we're not huge, breakfast guys. Even when we're camping and stuff, usually we wake up and it's the crack of dawn and we just brew a pot of coffee, fill our Yetis, and then we just go out fishing. And then we fish until our stomach just starts rumbling uncontrollably, usually around 1 p.m.
We might have like a couple granola bars.
Yeah. So for us, it never really... A good breakfast never really happens, unfortunately, but maybe if we invite Mitch fishing with us one day, he'll bring us breakfast. Here's a good question from Nicholas. He says, what's your number one confidence bass lure and why? I'd say there's 2 lures that I worked at a tackle shop and I said, so many people would come in and be like, I'm going bass fishing this summer. I've never fished before. I don't have a lot of experience fishing. I could give this person these 2 lures and I almost guarantee they would catch fish on them. And one is a stick bait, like a Senko, 4-inch, 5-inch green pumpkin. That's it on a wacky rig. That's it. Or a chatterbait, 3/8 white or green pumpkin chatterbait. It's easy. Cast it out, reel it in. Like I think I fish with my nephew sometimes. He can catch fish on a chatterbait. He's 11. No problem. Cast it out, reel it in. Fish it, cast it wherever. Like don't cast it into heavy weeds, but just cast it wherever. Let it sink depending where you are and reel it in. That's it. You'll catch fish. Wacky rig, same thing. Chuck it around docks. Like I took a guy fishing last year, doesn't have a lot of experience fishing. He bought one of those like Canadian Tire rods that came with a little tackle box with a bunch of jig heads and little crankbaits and stuff. And he was using that stuff for the first day and he was not catching anything. So I gave him a wacky worm and he just like drove out and I was like, just cast it around trees. And he cast around a tree and he ended up catching the biggest bass of the trip. This guy has no experience. He caught like a nice 4-pound bass easily without any skill whatsoever. So I'd say that a wacky worm or a chatterbait.
Texas rigged fluke, weightless fluke. That would be my big confidence one, more than a frog.
I know when I have a Senko on or like a stick bait and I cast it out, I almost am positive I'm going to catch something. So I'd say like the ultimate confidence bait is a stick bait.
We've had some really tough days, and when we break out the Senko, or the stick bait, it's because we have never skunked if we brought out a stick bait. Like we may not catch anything substantial, but we'll catch something.
True. Here's a question from Radio Voice Royce.
Hey.
He says, what podcasts do podcasters listen to, fishing related or not?
Well, I listen to some fishing related ones, obviously. But I have to say one of my favorites is actually Myths and Legends. And that's kind of what made me want to do some of the like fishing lore episodes that we've done, is because he talks about in a very humorous and kind of modernized way of the original myths and legends and fairy tales and stuff like that from the old stories. So he's very entertaining. Jason Weiser, awesome podcast.
I generally listen to a lot of fishing podcasts. I try to get through a lot of the popular ones. I do like a lot of the muskie. Right now, I'm kind of like dialed in on muskie right now. So I've been listening to a lot of muskie podcasts, Muskie 360. You know, we have so many fishing podcasts that you can listen to on many different topics. There's lots about bass, especially the ones from the States. They're all about bass fishing, but like Tackle Talk, all those shows, they're great. Podcasts are great just to listen to when you're working or when you're driving. Cause you know, you have your favorite songs and all that stuff. You're like, oh, I'm going to listen to this, listen to that. But I've heard it 1,000 times. It's always good to have some noise on that's fishing. Just love it. It's like, oh, just guys talking about fishing. And I mean, some of them are pretty good. Sometimes I listen to our podcast and I'm like, dang, this is good. Just kidding. I can't listen. People have asked me, do you listen to your own podcast? I'll tell you, honestly speaking, I can't, because by the time I edit the podcast and it goes live, I've probably slowly listened to it 4 times already, editing it and getting all the ums and ahs and, you know, boring poop out of it. I've listened to it so many times, I've probably memorized it. So when it actually airs, I don't listen to it. And I'm like, well, I hope that sounds good. But I'm sure someone will let me know.
I do listen to it. And if he did something wrong, I let him know.
Nice. Thanks for the support, Andrew.
But he always says great. So
here's a question. This guy says, are you going to make any more YouTube videos like the one that you did on your walleye trip, like a vlog? So YouTube videos, like we're not YouTubers. We're not even really podcasters. I don't even know what we are. We're just a bunch of random guys, but I do like making videos. We used to do a lot of that back in the day. It's a lot of work. Even keeping up with this podcast is a lot of work. We don't have that much time. It takes so much time every week just to get this podcast out. So when we do go on a random trip, we will try to do the odd vlog. I did notice we posted that one when we were walleye fishing with paddle heads, and it got a lot of views, like for what it was. And it didn't take that much. Like it wasn't like a long 30-minute video. It was like 10 minutes long. So yes, we will be doing more videos like that, but they won't be super regular just because we're busy guys. And again, like if you're doing YouTube as like a part-time gig, you could probably make money on it, but you don't make any money on YouTube. If you're just putting out the occasional video, it's not worth the time at all. It is nice to watch, but it's not going to be super regular. But we're actually going to go camping this weekend. So we're going to do one of those this weekend. So stay tuned for watching Andrew catch his PB largemouth. This is a good question. And we're going to end with 1 or 2 more, but this is a good question from Nathaniel. He says, price isn't a factor. What is your favorite brand of rod and reel?
With reels, I would have to say, if price is taken out of it, I would have to say Shimano. They are built super, super tough. Usually, like I'll often go Daiwa just because I can get maybe a bit more technology for a lower price range. Like I still have my Stratic, like my spinning reel. That thing's still going, like it's bulletproof. They're awesome. If I had to have like one reel, then it had to last me like a long time. Stratic, absolutely.
I don't think you can go wrong with Daiwa or Shimano. I don't think you can go wrong with those 2 brands. They have their own factories. They make their own reels. They're not made by some large reel manufacturer that makes everyone else's reels. You can't go wrong with those 2 brands. I'd probably say right now I'm kind of on a Daiwa kick. I just feel like their high-end stuff is really nice too. but their regular price stuff is really good. Like the Tatula line is excellent. I do have a ton of Shimano Curados and Scorpions, which are the same thing, SLX XT, stuff like that. Fantastic reels. It's hard to choose. Like we were saying the other day, Andrew, Daiwa and Shimano are different. They cast differently, they fish differently, but some people just prefer one over the other. But in general, I'd say they're both fantastic. As for rods, I've used almost every brand out there that you can get in Canada, not like all the small USA brands, but like St. Croix's my bread and butter. If I'm spending money on a rod, I have probably 15 St. Croix's. I just bought a new St. Croix Legend tournament flip and stick. I love St. Croix. Are they the best rods in the world? It depends. Like best is subjective to what you like. I like the styling of St. Croix. I like how it's kind of old school. I like the cork. I have also really nice Shimano rods that I love. I have Megabass rods that I love. I have Fenwick rods that I love. You know, I have G Loomis rods that I love. Like any good reputable rod company makes good rods. But if I had to pick one rod, it would probably be St. Croix. The warranty's fantastic too.
I would say the same. And that's because they have like a whole like a super high tier if you want that are in the price range of G Loomis, of all that stuff. But I've never owned a G Loomis personally. I've held Jesse's and I've Casa, great rod, don't get me wrong. But I've never like heavily fished something like that in that price range. But I know St. Croix, I have a few St. Croix rods and I love them. So I would be more willing to go into like a super high end St. Croix. That would kind of be my first choice just because I would trust it.
Yeah. And I've broke a few St. Croix's, not while fishing. It was my fault. I broke 2 of them in my car. And the warranty service was amazing. I had a new rod delivered to my house 3-4 weeks later.
Yeah.
No problem. Absolutely love that. But I'd say though, I have right now, most of the rods that I fish are St. Croix's. I do have a lot of Daiwas. Like I said, Daiwa's creeping into my selection too, because you can get a really nice Daiwa rod for like $200. Like the Tatula Elite rods, I have a few of those. Fantastic rods. Like it's hard not to buy. You pick up a rod or like a Kage, which is similar, same blank almost. I was at sale the other day and I picked up the Kage 7.1 medium heavy spinning and I was like, this would be an absolutely fantastic like, wacky worm rod or like shaky head rod or on like kind of like heavier cover. It's like $200. I mean, for me, like that may be a lot of money for you, but like that rod price point at $200 gets you an amazing rod, way better than what it used to get you. Even if you're spending around $100, $120, Daiwa knocks it out of the park still. The Daiwa XTs and the Canadian custom rods for $100 or $120, they're great rods. So Daiwa, yes. St. Croix, absolutely. Highly recommended. This is a good one to end with. This is from I Catch Dinks. He says, what is your worst fishing experience? We have so many, like we have so many. I'll give you an example. Last year, I was like, you know what? I want to break my PB muskie. My wife's like, well, what time of year? And I'm like, you know what? I want it to be, second week of September. Hopefully the fish will be shallow and I can go because I'm just fishing my canoe. So I booked this 3-day long trip on a place that I've seen giant muskie at. A lot of planning went into it. I had to drive up there, blah, blah, blah. And it was a rainstorm, like a thunderstorm. The first day I got out after I set up and I fished for maybe 2 hours and then it started pouring rain. I had to sit in my tent. Next morning I woke up, it was pouring rain. I bundled up in my raincoat. I went out anyway, but it was like a damp cold rain, like cold front cold rain. So I caught absolutely nothing, almost caught a cold. I was sopping wet. What I should have done is went home at that point, just packed up the tent and left because I was camping. But I decided to, spend the night in the damp, cold tent and then wake up in the morning and try fishing again. I go out again. It was like Noah's Ark rain. The canoe half filled with water almost. Like it was just a terrible trip. Didn't even see a fish till like the last few hours of the trip. The rain kind of petered off and I had a muskie blow up on a topwater and missed it. It was the worst trip I ever had. I was like damp, miserable. I was like moist the whole time. It was terrible. So that was the worst fishing experience I ever had. But it wasn't worse than like injury or like terrible accidents, but that was a terrible fishing trip that I had. And that was only last year.
Like I've had hooks in the hand and the arm before, but that didn't ruin the trip. Like I guess the worst trip I was ever on, I was actually with I was my brother, his son, my nephew, and we were doing some backcountry camping in Algonquin Park. So we portaged into this back lake in May for some trout. And the fishing was slow. I ended up getting a couple, like Lakers, Nothing huge. Like the biggest one I think was 17 inches or something like that. When we got there, all the sites were full. Even though you book a site on the lake, you can't book exact site numbers in Algonquin Park on the interior. And so we paddled this lake twice. Could not find a site. Someone had booked another nearby lake and just camped on that one. So we had to make our own site. I had forgotten my jacket in the car, and it was May, and it got down to like -2 at night, and I had my summer sleeping bag only. So I was putting on like my life jacket. I was putting on everything, all the clothes I could possibly muster together. I had like a flannel shirt was my like warmest piece of clothing. So the night, like I just kept waking up like a shiver down my spine. It was like it was uncomfortable sleeping that first night, especially. And then on the way back home, when we were heading back, after 2 nights, and we see a big storm rolling in. The wind is getting like worse, and we're like, okay, we'll wait till that big rain cloud comes by, and then we'll head out. And of course, the rain cloud goes by. It's still like raining a bit, but at least the big thing is done. But the wind is even worse now. And where the one site we found the next day was right on the main basin of the lake, and the wind's blowing directly, like almost directly at the shore. And again, this is May. So my brother, we have my canoe, which isn't like it's a portage canoe. So it's not like super stable. And these waves are big rolling white caps are like 2.5 feet, 3 feet tall in this lake. There I am, like with my pants rolled up to my knees, standing in this frigid water, holding it, getting everything loaded in. And my brother's in the front, I'm in the back. We got, my nephew in the middle. And we just tell him, don't help with paddling this time. Just, you have to sit in the middle, hold the gunnels, and not move. If you get wet, you're going to get wet. Don't move. Don't let go. Don't lean. Don't move. Like, just stay like a rock. And I am so proud of that kid because he didn't move. And there's waves splashing over, like soaking him up to his shoulder, like hitting the side because like the wind's blowing sideways. And he just held on and didn't move. I'm so happy with that, how he handled that. But yeah, I had to like kind of run us out on the shallow rocks through like frigid water. And, we got back, we didn't flip, but that was one of the most uncomfortable trips I've been on. But at the same time, super memorable. Looking back, I loved the trip. And it's one of my favorite like pictures of me in Algonquin Park I got off that trip too. Like it's one of those things, like we say, portaging can be annoying, but at the same time, after the moment's done, it is one of the most memorable things to look back on.
Definitely.
But in the moment, that was uncomfortable.
We'll end with this one last question because it's an easy one. This is from Mac Drums. He says, best go-to lure color for bass. Green pumpkin, people. That's all you need. Green pumpkin. It's so good. Looks like everything. Super natural. Looks like everything, but nothing in particular. The more I find that it looks like a poopy brown, the better. That's a tip from Jesse. Anyway, yeah, that's all the questions.
That's awesome. So we hope that it was entertaining for everyone. And I hope that if you're listening, you heard your name mentioned and your question answered. For anyone who didn't have the opportunity, try again by all means. Again, we will be prioritizing some of our Patreon members, again, because they are helping to support us. We thank all of our patrons for the amazing support they do give, because it is a huge load off for Jesse and myself to be able to have that support to continue making this podcast and the videos and stuff we're going to be doing forward to. So all those things, we really appreciate that. Just a couple bucks a month. And anyone who is a Patreon member is automatically entered with no additional effort into the giveaways that we're having every month. So we don't have anyone this week particularly, but we usually have at least 2 a month to give away that you're automatically entered in to win. And if Jesse will have that link down below if you are interested in joining or signing up for that. We also want to thank everyone who is just listening. If you can recommend us to your friends, or if you can write a review, we love to get reviews. We love to get rankings and stuff on whatever streaming service, especially on iTunes, helps out a lot in the rankings for us, which allows us to get even better giveaways and even cooler guests in the future as well.
Did you say iTunes? You can tell Andrew's an Android user. Apple Podcasts.
Apple Podcasts.
It's not iTunes.
Well, see, I grew up having the iPod video with the scroll wheel. Actually, I had the shuffle back then. This is way before touch screens were a thing. But anyway, thank you everyone who is listening. And as tradition states, at the end of the episode, we're going to have the quote of the week. And Jesse's going to handle that for us.
When life hands you lemons, squirt the juice into the eyes of your enemies.
Life gives you lemons.